Okay, people, so I'm going to try one more time to talk a little bit more about ontology. I've posted some videos very recently on why ontology is both primary and prior and larger than epistemology. I've been trying to suggest that epistemology is a smaller subset of ontology. And I've still had some people say, well, what is ontology? What exactly is that? And how does it not just slip into a kind of an epistemological project right away? Okay. Some of this is so difficult because I think most people just who are trained in philosophy in the US maybe have a lot less exposure to continental philosophy than they do to analytic philosophy. And analytic is by and large driven through an epistemological paradigm. It's post-Cartesian through and through. Okay. I think some of the ways to come at it would be when someone begins with the question, is something real or not? And they're going to try to do the great real shakedown, and they use the word real or is it not real and this kind of stuff. This is very likely someone who has firm footing in an epistemological orientation. And because from the ontological perspective, okay, from a person who comes at it through ontology, there isn't anything that isn't real. And there isn't anything that isn't real. The question is, what is the ontological status of the phenomena in question? See, that's the way you come at it. So, is art real? Well, someone might say art is a representation of reality, but it's not real. Well, no, art is real in its own regard. See, we can get at even representations. If someone wants to say, well, a representation is, a way that we symbolize reality, but it's not reality itself. Well, that misses the ontological occurrence that is the very fact of representation. As representation, whether it emerged or not, the phenomena is occurring and we can recognize it. Take things like hallucinations, or even better, take dreams. Descartes' nightmare, was the dream, and the evil genie who's fooling you, and you're dreaming but not realizing that you're dreaming. There's a sense in which when we wake up, we can say, oh, that dream was not real. That was simply and merely a dream. And yet dreams have their own ontological status. Again, that would be, a very quick way to come at it. And we could, look at the reality. See, again, use the reality of the non-real things. Some person like Richard Alpert, who Harvard psychologist, there along with Timothy Leary, he does a bunch of psychedelics and has experiences. Now, the physiological chemical changes in his brain, the neurophysiological changes that must have occurred, that I think the contemporary scientific epistemologist would come and say, well, here's what happened. That is a very different order of explanation than something like Baba Ram Das, who was Alpert, would give of this, right? I mean, Baba Ram Das basically had experiences that connected him with the larger world, and those transformed who he knew himself to be. In some way he discovered who he was, in some way he created who he was, but the experience was very much of transforming his being, not simply epistemological. That is, the epistemologist might say he's went from one kind of delusion, which is, all of the manifest image as opposed to the scientific image, into a different form of illusion, right? One that was precipitated by, cultural beliefs as they became hallucinations and this kind of stuff. The reason that I have stressed things like art and language is because these, language especially, but art is the best example for the nature problem. If you say, is there art in nature, many people will say, no, there is no art in nature. People do art. And again, they simultaneously, just in one pass, boom, they cut past it, and they make humans seem like they're other than natural, and the whole of nature is now misunderstood because they've just taken a huge part of it and removed it from it, and then we're talking about nature. But the natural, as it has ever shown itself to anyone who's ever known about it, has always already included humans. See, I think part of the way to say the problem is that language offers many different ways of relating to the world. That language is a way of acting. It's a species of acting. And one of those forms of action is a denotative proposition or an assertion. So someone might make an empirical claim. They might say, the cat is on the mat. Or they'll say, this sentence is in English. You can get really complex ones. And there are, at that point, multiple levels of analysis that would be need to spell out. But the phenomena is occurring in such a way that the language and the language use seems to be largely epistemological. It's one of knowing and of truth conditions and warrantability for the claim. But most language isn't anything like that. Most language isn't anything like that at all. It's jokes, it's overstatements. You say, oh, what a fine day. And you don't mean a fine day. But you don't really mean it as a factual assertion of it being a bad day either. The whole thing is caught in a playfulness. People say, pass me the salt, and, can you open the door, and can you help me? And when they're giving commands and requests, or when people are asking questions, none of these are using language in an assertive or an epistemological orientation. So I think for a phenomenologist, or somebody who's been trained in fundamental ontology, the argument would begin something like this, that any time any person makes an assertion about something, they've always already forehad that thing in some way. That is, you can't make an assertion about something that you haven't already encountered in an other than an assertive context or an other than a raw epistemological domain. We make assertions and we make, warranted propositions about states of affairs, but it's always after being caught in those states of affairs and having those conditions disclosed by things that are more than representational and more than epistemic. There's so many different ways to come at it. Try to think of there are interpersonal social dynamic issues. So some person thinks to themselves, I'm a bad dancer, as a statement. Now, when they say I'm a bad dancer, are they giving that as a fact? Is it an explanation to help them get out of having to dance? It's not predicating a substance. I mean, they could always learn to dance better. It's some kind of complex self-relation which is ambiguous in the very speech genre, right? We're not sure what the utterance itself means when the person says, I'm a bad dancer. Now, we'd have to know from context. Maybe the context would give it away. But even, take some person who says, I have an ugly nose. If a person says, I have an ugly nose, is this an objective fact that could be assessed? And let's just say that it could be. Okay, let's just for argument's sake. No, I don't think it can. I think aesthetic judgments, they move us out of the epistemological domain. They have all kinds of other dynamics relative to observer, and we could give conditions for aesthetics and for beauty and whatnot. But if you just grant it for the case and say, okay, let's say it is an ugly nose. We go, oh yeah, everyone agrees, that honker's a problem. Does that mean from there the person should do something about it? I mean, what would be the point of giving an assertion if not something out of that? And so I think, part of the point is that even when one does use language in a rigorously warranted way, it still gets caught into larger values about, okay, now what, which can't be reduced to the epistemological domain and those concerns. Again, going back to, think of the case of unicorns. Now, are unicorns real? Right? And the person who says they're not real, this is usually the epistemological claim, like there are no unicorns in reality. Well, there kind of are. There are fictional stories of these things we call unicorns. Now, what are unicorns? Well, unicorns are a fiction. Unicorns are something that we can talk about because we're able to imagine such things. Are unicorns part of the material world that science deals with? No, I think we're going to say no, but that doesn't mean they're not real. See, I think the question is, how is the phenomena in question showing itself? Okay, I need to add a quick addendum on religious experiences. And I think, part of the question of ontology would be, what is the status of a religious experience? Now, I think this is where it really comes to a head in the contemporary world. For some person, they might argue that, and this is sort of the Baba Ram Das case again, for some person, they might try to suggest that the hallucination, is what they're going to call it, is a anomalous brain state where some person, I guess, believes falsely to be more connected with the cosmos. I mean, I really don't know what some of that means. I mean, scientifically, it's disclosed that we are very connected to the world. So it has to do with, I guess, a feeling state where you say the person feels themselves to be more connected to the world than most other people do according to their sort of biological programming. And yet, I think the more we start to ask about what is a religious experience and how is it possible, the more it poses an ontological problem. That, why, when people have brain dysfunction, let's try it that way. If someone has a brain dysfunction, why do religious experiences happen? From where do they come? Now, is a religious experience, is it just based upon, I don't know, superstition and other kinds of things? Like we can imagine, I don't know, people seeing a rhino and seeing a horse and then being able to imagine a unicorn. Or we can imagine a person who was maybe a baby who was born, who was disfigured at birth, who had only one eye, and then was in the center of its head and was left out in the wild, and eventually, through happenstance and good fortune and luck and rearing of wild animals, it lived long enough for some person to see it, and it was the origin of the Cyclops myth. Okay? Those, to me, are very different, and again, then other people talk about the myth, and people say that there are such fantastical things, and then because of that people imagine it. But what is the origin of the religious experience? See, I think to someone who has had a profound religious experience, and they feel like they have been transformed in their very being, that who they are is now different. And it's related to how they know themselves and know the world, but who they are has changed. Or at least it's been revealed to such a degree that they can no longer know themselves like they previously did because they feel themselves to be someone else. Right? I think part of the question is, what is that? Now, if we're going to say, if someone's going to try to reduce it to an epistemological issue, and some person is either knowing the world falsely or more correctly, how exactly will you treat something like a religious experience? If the person is qualitatively happier with their life, if they're making more significant contributions to the larger world, if they feel more fulfilled, where is the falseness of it? Now, if it includes claims like there will be life after death, or if it includes claims like there will be a judgment, or that Jesus, was resurrected from the dead, or whatever, those are very different. Those are theological speculations and philosophical arguments. Those are different than a religious experience and how that occurred in nature. Like, why, when brains have malfunction, why don't they just shut down? Why don't they go blurry? Why don't they just turn gray and or make the person sad or worried or filled with anxiety? Why would a person have radical openness and profound sense of love, gratitude, all these kinds of things? Now again, if someone tries to say, well, this is something, and again, this is a huge epistemological framework gets brought to bear upon an experience, but a person will say, well, it had survival value to have these kinds of experiences that would give the organism, I don't know, optimism, energy. I don't know what the argument would be. I guess something along those lines. It seems like a very pressed argument and sort of stretched compared to the direct experience of those who've ever had a religious experience. Right? And part of this does have to do with the issue of experience rather than third-person observer sort of view from nowhere stuff. I think this is why, again, going back to the dreams stuff, but if you go instead to dreamless sleep, and what is the meaning of dreamless sleep, and does dreamless sleep say something about who we are? See, now, from the perspective of ontology, this is really a key question. It's not just what can we know about the organism which is dreamlessly asleep. That is, you, while you're dreamlessly asleep, that's not a condition of epistemology, right? There's no epistemological state that you're in while you're dreamlessly asleep. You can't know in a direct way about whether or not you are dreamlessly asleep. Like, you're not going, oh, yep, there I am, dreamlessly asleep, here's how it is, and you're not going to spell out all of the predicate properties of it. Now, you can, upon waking, try to remember right before you fell asleep, and maybe your dreams and some of these other aspects, but there's a sense in which there's a natural epistemic aporia into the very being of the human. That is, the human as a dreamless sleeper, as part of who we are. This is a disclosure of organismal being, which it's a reminder that for anywhere between a third and a quarter of your everyday, you're not in anything like an epistemological relationship with the larger world. You're in a vegetative, nutritive state. You're not knowing things. You're organically integrating, and if you try to say what epistemologically does that fact disclose about us, I don't know. I think your contemporary epistemologist says, I have nothing to say about that. Whereas the contemporary ontologist says, can't we see what this fact about who we are says about the whole of being? All right. It's going to have to be good. Thanks.